Yeah. All right. Want to welcome everyone back to these classes on Noahide laws. Again, want to welcome everyone back to these classes on the Noahide laws, and we're holding by monetary laws. Spoke a few weeks back. Guys had a good break. All right. Spoke about monetary laws. Now we're going to speak. And a lot of these laws are complex, by the way. We're trying to make it easy here, but there's a lot over here, as we're going to see today. We're going to speak about the overview of the laws of theft. So, person goes, oh, Noahide law, that's easy. Don't steal, don't this. Yeah, we're going to see. Much more complex than people think. Right? So we say over here, if you're going to explain every which way monetary laws apply, this would be a very long course. Extremely long course. So we have, you look at finance, you look at business, a lot of things changing, right? Daily basis, yearly basis, definite differences in commerce, trade. Things are always adapting, being created. Now, how you gonna know what to do? How you gonna know what to do over here? So you gotta be aware. Most important thing here is to be aware what the issues are. So here we're going to speak about specific types of theft that are alluded to in the Torah, talking about Jews and non-Jews, i.e. Noahides. And we're going to go according to the Rambam's, the halachas in the Rambam on Hilchos Gezela, i.e. stealing. Geneva also stealing, right? Gezela means you steal by force. Geneva, you steal by hiding. And the Rambam say for a mitzvah. The first thing is, the Torah says don't steal. You shall not steal. We just read that yesterday, Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. Now, most people not aware. I wasn't aware until I actually learned it. And that is that when it says over here, do not steal, Exodus 20, verse 15, does not refer to theft of money, right? Or goods. What it's talking about? Theft of another person, i.e. kidnapping, right? And, we're going to discuss that. But there are other verses to tell me not to steal. So the question, 10 commandments, that would be obvious, right? Obviously, it's talking about not stealing, right? No, it's talking about kidnapping. So if you look at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 11, first time Torah says, do not steal. With the full force of the prohibition against what? Stealing property, right? Stealing something that does not belong to you. So, according to this, what will we say? Comes according to general prohibition. General prohibition of what? Don't steal. That's called Geneva, right? That's called Geneva in Hebrew. Now, what is it talking about? We're talking about a case where you steal somebody's property, not you, somebody steals someone's property without the victim's awareness. You steal in hiding. He doesn't know, or she doesn't know. Now, there are going to be other prohibitions, right, over here, that even if a person takes the item with intent of returning it or pay for later, as the Rambam says, Code of Jewish law says, right, or you take it as a practical joke, also be forbidden. In other words, you're going to say, well, if the whole purpose over here is you're going to take it in order to return it, well, that's wrong. Can't do it. Right? You're not allowed to. Right? You pay back later, so why does that make it any better? Or to take it as a practical joke. No, not allowed to. Right? Or something, let's say, normally rented with the intent of returning it later and paying for the time. Right? Be another issue. Another issue over here. All right, so the whole question, Right? There's no question what the level of liability is. Right? The Minchas Chino makes a distinction and disagrees with this liability. Right? Others say no. Same thing for a Jew and a non-Jew. Even taking an item from a store, leaving money behind without the shopkeeper's approval. Could be exact change. So, also may not be permitted. Right? And we'll see. We'll see exactly why. Maybe the money won't get to him. Something else. But we'll see what that is. Person cannot even steal for a constructive purpose. What does that mean? For example, you can't steal from someone to teach him better guard his belongings. You got to teach someone a lesson. Right? You got to teach someone a lesson how to guard property better. So what do? You take from them to show them. No. Oh, here's a good one. You're not allowed to steal from someone who cheated you in the past. Oh, that's too bad. Right? I never have someone I could do that with, but for no longer living, so it wouldn't help. Right? But, someone who cheated you, you'd say, well, that money's mine. Belongs to me. Well, guess what? Doesn't. Right? You're not allowed to take it. No matter why the person stole it or not. Forbidden. Right? It's going to be forbidden over here. But this is going to be a hard one. Person caused you damage. So what? Two wrongs don't make a right. You're also not allowed to steal an item from another thief. Another problem. He stole it. The other person probably gave up on it. So why can't you take it from him? Right, there'll be a whole question also of stealing something in order to compensate the owner. That we'll see. Potentially we'll see. In short, what's going on over here? What's simple explanation? You can never take possession of another person, right? Take the possession of another person unless the other person is granted permission. Now, it could be, let's say you come into a study hall to learn. You take someone's book, right? You take someone's book to learn from. Are you allowed to? That might be different because the person will say, sure. I want to help you with a mitzvah. So good. But if it says don't take without permission, you wouldn't be allowed to. If it's for the sake of a mitzvah, maybe it's okay. Right? But in general, if you have not been granted permission, not for the sake of a mitzvah, be forbidden. The intent of the one taking the items makes no difference. In other words, you want to teach someone a lesson. Person caused you damage. You say the money belongs to you. In general, no. Not allowed to take, no excuses. There is an exception. In the case of a person cannot sufficiently guard his property due to disability or infirmity. Right? Let's say someone's got disability. They can't guard the property. In such a case, it's permitted and probably necessary for another to take guard his possessions if necessary. In other words, why would you be allowed to do that? Because they can't do it for themselves. If they can't do it for themselves, then you might have a mitzvah to do so. You might have an absolute obligation to do so. Now, what's the difference between robbery and theft? Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13 says you shall not commit robbery. What's the difference between stealing and robbery? It says the Gemara Baba Kama 79b, robbery is called gazel in Hebrew. It's different from geneva, which is theft. Isn't the same thing? You rob someone, steal from someone. Why is there any difference? So there the Gemara says stealing carried out in secret is called geneva. Gezela means you stole by force, full knowledge of the victim. Right? As the Rambam brings down. Laws of stealing, laws of robbery, chapter 1, halacha 3. So the Rambam there says, you're taking it by force. You pushed Granny aside and you took her purse by force. As proof, Talmud cites Samuel 2, chapter 23, verse 21. refers to a spear being forcibly taken from a person. Now, what is included in this? Armed robbery, threats, and intimidation and blackmail. In other words, give me this or I'm going to do this or that. Right? I'm going to cause you damage in other ways. Intimidation, forbidden. Right? I had a case. Blackmail. Oh, this is great. Happened to me. Tell you a case. I was in South America and I ratted on someone who was selling wine that was being watched by somebody that did not keep Shabbos. Which means the wine can't be used, can't be drunk, has to be flushed down the toilet. Now everybody knew this. Everyone was afraid of this person who was giving the rabbinic supervision. So I called it in. Because my Rebbe told me you got to call it in because people are getting, it's got rabbinic supervision and you can't use it. So what happened? I got fired from my job. Now they owed me compensation. So what they say, they gave me a letter to sign saying, we're not compensating you until you sign a letter saying you are not going to speak against any rabbis in the community. So what do we call that? Blackmail. That's called extortion. Right? So how's that permitted? It's not. Right? And I lashed out at this person. I said, listen, this is extortion. This is totally forbidden. Right? He said, it doesn't matter. The person paying the bills, you're not going to get paid otherwise. So asked my Rebbe what to do. So he said, so there was a way out of it. How I could sign and save face. He said, say in front of two witnesses, just sign it under duress. Then if you can ever go after them, you go after them. Right? So there was a way around it, but that's clearly blackmail. If it's forbidden for non-Jews, all the more so for Jews. You're going to say, how could Jews do this? How could Orthodox Jews do this? Yeah. Because they're not so Orthodox, are they? Wasn't necessarily intimidation, it's blackmail. 100%. Blackmail. So that's the difference between Geneva and Gezela. Geneva means you steal, not you, somebody steals in hiding. Gezela means you do it straight up. Robbery, threats, intimidation, whatever it is. Armed robbery, whatever it is. It comes along Leviticus chapter 25, verse 14. Right? This also comes under this. It says, when you sell an item to your neighbor or purchase something from him, do not victimize each other. Now the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean to victimize? So this prohibition is called ona, or onus devarim. It's really called ona. Onus devarim is like when you make fun of somebody. Call him shorty or whatever. Right? Ona means that there's victimization or deception. Right? So the Gemara explains what Messiah 49b, the 50b, 61a, discusses what this is. Right? The implications over here. But there are a lot of other places as well, and it's brought down by the Rambam on the Laws of Selling, chapter 12, Code of Jewish Law, Choshen Mishpat 227. Now, how do you transgress over here? Person transgresses prohibition by charging someone by more than 1/6, i.e. 16.67% of fair market price for an item. Now, certain things that fluctuate in value, let's say real estate, other things, you don't transgress over here. All right, we're going to see why. If a person overcharged somebody, then you have to return that over to the buyer. And that's considered stolen, even though the buyer paid it willingly. Right? So you're going to say, but if he paid it willingly, he didn't care, he wanted the thing, he's willing to overpay. No, forbidden. The buyer made demand the entire transaction be voided. Also, prohibition applies on the buyer's end as well. Because let's say a buyer underpays by more than 1/6, or 16.67%. Seller can demand the difference be paid, or the sale be voided. It goes both ways. The seller can overcharge, or the buyer can underpay. Now, that being said, we have another issue. There's a statute of limitations. on these transactions. Usually the amount of time needed to complete due diligence and determine whether or not the item was priced correctly. Could be, varies from 6 to 24 hours. Now, statute of limitations can be also. Can be, let's say, person owed money to a credit card. And then they can't pay it. And it goes to collection. And they can't pay that. And they have a certain amount of time they can go. They can go after you for the money. Now, what happens? What happens? There's a certain amount of time and it goes according to states. Not every state has the same thing. But there's a statute of limitations. That means that once a certain amount of time is over, let's say 7 years, 8 years, whatever it is, if a company comes and tries to get the money out of you, you can sue them for harassment. So there's a certain amount of time they have. That's what a statute of limitations is. In this case, you don't have that much time. 6 to 24 hours. Now, someone's going to ask, does this apply to everything? Does this apply to all goods? Now, there are certain things that are exempt. One of them we mentioned, real estate. Buyers and sellers don't have any recourse to demand compensation or void a real estate transaction. Some hold that this case of ona remains prohibited. According to many scholars, not even a prohibition. Why? Because real estate goes, so I was involved in real estate years ago, real estate goes by what something sold for. Right? So let's say you have a lot of things on the market. People asking an arm and a leg. But how do you evaluate what a property may be worth? You go according to the comps. What are the comps? What things have sold for on the market similar to your, let's say, to your house, to this house you want to buy. So if you want to see what the real value is, see over the last 3 months, similar houses in your area that sold that are similar to yours and what they actually sold for, not what people are asking. That's the value. Now, what if someone wants to overpay? What if it's supply and demand? Can they overpay? They can overpay. Right? They can overplay. Or they can overpay over here. If they want. That doesn't come underneath this prohibition. Because there's no set value. That's the problem. There's no set value. Like here in Israel, it's funny. You live in a war zone, so to speak, and prices just keep going up. They don't stop. They just keep going up. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But the value of something is what is sold for. Can a person ask whatever they want? Sure. And if you overpay, doesn't matter. Because there's no set value here. Collectibles, antiques, other items. They have no real utilitarian value. So they're not subject to ona. Right? Someone thinks it's worth a lot, someone thinks it's worth nothing. Right? The value of these items is only based on desire. Right? A person, I don't know, get a brand new Jackie Robinson card. Right? It's going to be worth a lot. Someone else ain't worth anything. Right? So in collectibles, you can charge whatever you want. Items whose value is determined by appraisal. That can change. Right? That is subjective. So that's always not so clear. But it's subjective to what something is valued at. Auction and bartering are items that are sold via auction, commonly bartered in exchange for other goods. Also not an issue. Why? But you have a car, goes on the auction block. Car was taken from a drug dealer. So okay, now they're going to sell it. On the market, it might be worth this, but you know what? They got to sell it. No one's going to pay full price. Just the opposite. They're going to get a good deal over here. Or let's say buying property, auctioning property. Let's say it went into foreclosure or whatever the case is. And now, they're auctioning this property. What's the value? Doesn't seem to have a value. Right? And you can overpay for it. So, that wouldn't be an issue as well. Now, if you look at what this is, there's a lot of things here, or a number of things, that are misunderstood and really transgressed. Right? By Jews, Noahide everyone else. Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. It's not covet. Right? It says, do not covet. So, it says, do not covet your neighbor's house. Now, this verse cannot prohibit the feeling of envy, jealousy, Right? Another commandment. Someone has desire for someone else's property. Now, what's the language of those sachmod? Not so clear. That's a little bit strange, the language over here. Comes along Exodus chapter 7, verse 25. Now I understand better. Why? It says, you shall burn in fire the graven image of your gods. You shall not covet, lo sachmod. Do not desire, should not want the gold and silvers upon and take it for yourself. In other words, graven image, you got to get rid of, you got to destroy. You got to burn it. What about the gold and silver? Maybe I can take it. The lo sachmod involves actual taking possession of someone else's property. It's not just you desire to have it. It's actual taking possession. Now, it cannot come to forbid seizure by force. That we already know. How do I know? Because we already said that's robbery. It's not the same. That'd be the same thing. So what type of taking over here is implied? The Gemara says, speaks about this in other places. And the Rambam explains laws of robbery, chapter 1, halacha 9. The Rambam says like this. Anyone who covets a servant, maidservant, house, utensils belonging to a colleague, or they covet any other article that can be purchased from him, and you pressure him with friends, requests, until the owner agrees to sell it. In other words, you pressure until the person sells it. That violates a negative commandment. Even though he pays for it. You're going to say he paid for it. Right? Even if he paid for it over here, so what? The fact is, he put pressure on him to sell. Whatever it is. It's stated, do not covet. You don't violate this commandment, the Rambam says, until you actually take possession. Not just the thoughts of wanting it. You have to take possession. As alluded to the verse, do not covet the gold and the silver upon them and take it for yourself. So Rambam's learning literally that you only transgress when you take it for yourself. Right? So the word sachmod refers to coveting accompanied by an action. What's the action? Right? What's the action over here? It's taking possession. Now, the question is, at what point do we say a person trying to get someone to sell, at what point does that become harassment? So the Betzil HaChochma from Rabbi Chaim Stern lived from 1910 to 1988. Was Hungarian rabbi settled in Melbourne after the Holocaust, and with his brother Moshe Stern, author of the Be'er Moshe, a famous work, played a crucial role in rebuilding Judaism post-Holocaust. Okay. Comes along the Betzil HaChochma, and he brings a strong proof that what? Solicitation to buy becomes harassment only after 3 attempts have already been made. In other words, you're pressuring them 3 times, 3 different times to acquire this thing. That's called harassment. But only in a case where 2 parties have equal standing and influence to each other. In other words, one party has particular influence over the other, may be totally different. For example, the buyer is the landlord to the unwilling seller. Yeah, then even fewer than 2 attempts may be called harassment. If the buyer knowingly uses his influence or his position to influence the sale, could be 1 attempt. Could be 1 attempt is bad over here. Depends, right? Depends on the circumstances. Also, if you make repeated attempts under the same price and terms. Right? Let's say you keep bothering someone the same amount. In each attempt, the buyer offers terms or prices more advantageous to the seller. That's called the first attempt. So the question is, does it work the opposite way? In other words, a salesman who desires the money of a customer, do they transgress the prohibition by pushing the customer to buy? Real estate agents can be like that. Real estate agents can be pushy. Telling you all the benefits and this and that. Then, why are they going out on a limb, telling you over and over because they want to sell. Some holds, well, Sachmo is the problem even in these situations, but others holds that we are lenient. But the whole thing is, not so simple. Many rabbinical authorities say you have to desire something specific in order to transgress this prohibition. Money, not considered a specific item over here to incur this prohibition. So if the sale person wants to bring in money, not necessarily want a particular $20 bill, let's say, or wants money over someone else. Okay, it's a different issue, but there's a big discussion here. Big discussion here. Also, if you press another party into a sale, Torah forbids it because you're entertaining plans and thoughts to deprive someone of the property. In other words, you try and convince someone to sell. They didn't really want to sell, let's say. But you convince them to try and sell. It says, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 18, do not desire los tesave your neighbor's house. What does it mean, los tesave? Some translate it wrongly as you shall not covet. But really, it should be you shall not desire. There's a difference. In other words, if you desire another's property, then you're on your way to transgression. Also, if you look at Micha, chapter 2, verse 2, they desired field and they robbed him. In other words, you start off one way, desiring something, and then you go about to try and get it. Because once you try and figure out how you're going to gain this property, even when inclination comes along, take strong hold of a person's judgment. In other words, you get biased over here. You want to try and convince the person, come on, it's better to sell at this price. What do you need it for? It's a lot of aggravation. It's this, it's that. In other words, you're trying to convince the person to sell and they don't really want to sell. Or they want to sell according to your conditions. If the one who desires the object presses or forces the owner to sell, yeah, that's going to be a problem. And the buyers transgress two prohibitions. First of all, desiring the property. Second, pressing another to part with his property. One thing, you desire the property, that's problematic. The other problem is you're forcing him to sell. But don't you say if he sold, isn't that good enough? He had full desire, yeah, but you convinced him, you connived him to finally sell. Now, many commentators look at Kings 1, chapter 21 as a cautionary tale on desire. Now, that's about covetous thoughts and then plans to acquire. What about false weights and measures? So false weights and measures, not only is it prohibited to represent the weights, measures, other details of its merchandise, you're not allowed the owner possess items used for transactional fraud or deceit. There's one thing, to misrepresent something. It's another thing to possess something that actually doesn't, that actually creates fraud. That we learned from Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 13 to 14. Do not have two stones in your bag, one large, one small. Do not have in your house two aphos, measured units, one large, one small. In other words, you're not allowed to keep such an item, even use it for honest purposes. Let's say you keep a false weight, use it as a paperweight. Right? You use it as a paperweight. Totally use it as a paperweight. That's okay. Right? Seemingly that's okay. Right? That would be fine. What's the problem? Right? The problem is using it for something that's forbidden. Right? That would be a problem. Details of this prohibition discussed in the Talmud, Bava Metzia 61a, Bava Basra 89b. Also, I got a problem. So that's weights and measures. But also, I have another issue. And that is that if it's forbidden to misrepresent weights, measures, and other things of one's merchandise, and against owning instruments of such frauds, then you got to maintain and ensure our weights, measures, other representations are correct. In other words, you always have to clean off the scale. You're measuring something, right? You're weighing something. You got to make sure the scale is accurate. Because the Torah tells me, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 36, right? The Torah tells me, just balances, just weights, a just ephah, a certain measure, just in a just hin, another measure you shall have. In other words, you got to make sure 100% that these values, that these weights or measures are accurate. So therefore, I got a positive command, quality control, ensure that customers are not charged improperly. So therefore, it's being dishonest, right? In other words, your weights are off. So if your weights are off, the scale is off, you're mischarging. Now, last thing here is, what about debts? Leviticus chapter 19, verse 3 tells me, do not hold that which is due, i.e., you got to pay someone for what they did. It means withholding payment owed when the debtor has full ability to pay the creditor. In other words, you owe money, right? Let's say you owe someone a debt. So employers must pay employees and debtors must pay creditors. In other words, you got obligations. So if you have obligations, you got to pay. So the prohibition is not only transgressed by flat denial, right? Let's say you say, I don't owe you the money, God forbid, but also pushing off payment with excuses and delays. If it's a legitimate excuse or whatever, okay. But if you're trying to just push them off so you don't have to pay, it's a different issue. Also, it's forbidden, Leviticus 19, verse 11. You're not allowed to deny a debt because it says do not deny it. So therefore, it's also prohibited from falsely denying another entrusted him with an item or money. In other words, someone gave you something. Someone gave you, I don't know, a ming vase to watch. They come back a week later and say, where's my ming vase? You never gave me anything. I don't know, ming, sing, ding. I don't have anything. Obviously, you're not allowed to falsely deny. A person may also not falsely deny borrowed an item. They say, hey, you borrowed this. Where is it? So I didn't borrow it. I know what you're talking about. If you deny a debt, or that one has another's property in his possession, even if the other person gave it to you and trusted you willingly, how can you deny it? You commit a form of passive theft. You deny it. You say, you never gave it to me, but he did. You know where that ming vase is. Not like you misplaced it. That's stealing. That's a form of theft. Now, you'll tell me, why is that a form of theft? So we can base it on the technicality over here, right? What's the technicality? Technicality is, you can say, I didn't steal. He gave it to me. Right? Gave it to me willingly. I didn't take it. I didn't do anything with it. I didn't take it. Right? That doesn't matter. It's a brazen denial of having the items or money in his possession. What is that? It's unlawful seizure, i.e. theft. Right? In the vernacular, it's called theft. Right? Now, you'll tell me, but he didn't steal it in secret. He didn't beat him up to get it. True. Very, very true. But what's the problem? The problem is you got it. Even if you got it in a permissible way to watch it. Now you say, no, I never got it. I never got it over here. So it's a brazen denial of having the items in your possession. Right? That's like saying I took it illegally. Right? But again, what's the argument on the other side? You never took it. He gave it to you. It's not stealing. You didn't steal it in public. You didn't beat him up to take it. You didn't hide it. You didn't steal it in hiding. He gave it to you. But you're denying it. You're denying the fact that he gave it to you. So if you deny the fact that he gave it to you, what's it called? It's like a form of theft. It's like you seized it without permission. But you're going to say, but he never got it. I didn't do it that way. Doesn't matter. That's the way it looks. Right? That's the way it looks. So, that's falsely denying the debt. Any questions on any of that. Not withholding payments, requirements of weights and measures, owning false weights and measures, etc. Covetous plans, interesting, right? Meaning that if a person has these bad desires to have something, the person probably is going to try and carry it out to get it, right? And pressing another into a sale, that probably happens quite a bit. That, you get someone that wants to sell. They don't really want to sell. They end up making a deal, but they didn't want to, and you press them into it, right? And overcharging, undercharging, or general aspects of theft. Any questions on any of that? By the way, when it comes to monetary law, I'm just going to point out, certainly in Jewish law, most of these laws are all Torah prohibitions. They're mostly all Torah prohibitions. So, Jews go running to learn, the laws of Shabbos, the laws of blessings, other things, mostly rabbinical. How many people these laws are complex. 100% they're complex, right? But, how many people are sitting and really learning and they're in business, right? These are all Torah prohibitions. A lot of these apply equally. No question to Jews and non-Jews. Yeah. So any questions on any of that?
Hello, Rabbi. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in an area where bad connections. I know that teacher showed up.
You're coming in choppy.
I had to move to I had to get I'm in my car. I had an assignment that was supposed to be long for his pay, and when I showed up, that I teacher was there, and they asked me to hold on for a moment, and the teacher said that she did not go to the train that she was supposed to go. I told her she didn't have to go, and so the secretary asked the principal, "Do you need him anywhere?" And they said no. So they said, "Well, we don't have anything for you, but we'll give you a half day."
Okay.
Would that be a form of theft because it's already before for a full day?
I don't understand the question. What? Just repeat the question. It just wasn't clear.
Oh, so the assignment that I accepted for a full day.
Right.
Okay.
And they only had a half day. They knew for sure. Might have to type it. Where'd you go? Hello. He's out of commission. The question was, I think if I understood the question right, was that if they assigned you a full day, they wanted to hire you for a full day, and they find out they didn't need you. You signed up for a full day, and then they wanted to squirm out of it by saying, you can tell me if I'm wrong, right? But they wanted to squirm out of it by saying they only had half a day. They still owe you for the full day. Yeah, that's misleading. If you signed up, for a full day, and they say, well, we only have half a day. Now, if you knew that at the outset and you say, I'm going to take it anyway, it's one thing, right? But if you said I signed up for a full day, they owe you for the half a day. They should owe you for the half a day, if I understood the question right. They should have to pay. They should have to pay that that other half a day. In other words, if you agreed, you'll say, okay, I'll even take a half a day if you have it. That's one thing. If you said, I want a full day, they said, we have a full day. Right, then you come and say, oh, sorry, we only, we don't have anything to only pay for the half a day. We really should pay you for the full day. Right? They really should be obligated because they knew that you were coming in for a full day. They can't just say, "Oh, well, we don't have anything, so I'm going to pay you half a day." Unless it's on the books where they could say, "Well, we'd only agree to pay you for a full day if we had a full day. So since we don't have a full day or we don't have anything, we'll pay you for half a day." If that's on the books, I think you're stuck. Right? If that would be on the books, and they could say, "Well, that's misleading. Well, we thought we had something full day. We found out we don't have anything. So instead of paying you full day, we're going to pay you half a day. So half a day is better than nothing." That's probably what they think. Right? If that's on the books now to do that, it's like a fail-safe thing, meaning that, if they ever get stuck, if they ever get stuck, then they could say, "Well, we don't have anything, so they can't send you home without anything." They'll say, "Okay, so we'll agree to pay you half." But you said at the outset, full day, right? They really should be liable for a full day, right? But they could have a, I'm not saying that's a right, but they could have on the book saying, "Well, if we have nothing, we have the right to pay you half," right? But that's a good question. What happens in such a case? In other words, you're coming in thinking, okay, they got you for a full day. Great. So you come in and they say, "Well, sorry, we don't have anything." So at the very least, okay, we don't want to waste your time. So we'll give you a half day. All right. So the question is, do they owe you for the full day? Right. If I understood the question correctly, if that's the question, then if that's the question, then they should really have to pay you the full day. But I'm saying, according to them, they may say, "Well, we didn't have a full day." Right? Why should we? I'm just giving the other side of the argument. If, I have to clarify this further, but I would assume if they're going to claim, "Well, we would have been willing to pay you a full day." Problem is, we didn't have anything. So if we didn't have anything, why should we be on the hook for a full day? We'll pay you half a day. We don't have a problem paying you half a day. Full day we're not going to do because we didn't have anything. Right? That would be their argument. And if the question is, does that pan out? Does that pan out according to Jewish law? Right? That would have to investigate further. I would say my gut would tell me. My gut would tell me it doesn't matter. They said they have a full day. They can't now go back and say, "Well, sorry, we don't have anything. We'll pay you for half a day." You said a full day. You're obligated. Right? That's how I would say they have to pay full price. Why should they get away with paying half? And they're going to say, "Why I have a right to pay half? Because we didn't have anything." Right? So at least you're getting something better than nothing. We could have said you get nothing. Right? That's what they could have said. You came. Okay, very good. We'll pay you for your gas. We'll pay you for your gas. Don't worry. Your gas isn't even close to Israel. So, just in Florida, gas was cheap. $3.50. $3.50 a gallon. I would love to see $3.50. We're seeing like $9 a gallon. That's insane. Insane. Right? So they can say we're not even going to pay you half. We're being generous. We're going to pay you half. You know what we could have paid for? Gas. We're going to say, "Sorry, we don't have anything." So then you could have argued, "Okay, you're going to give me gas? Forget it. Pay me half." Right? But they could have said, we're going to pay you gas. So they're going to claim they're being fair. They're being more than fair. They're giving you half. They don't have to give you anything. Right? But you're going to argue, "No, you told me you had a full day." Right? So pay a full day. So I think, so my gut feeling would be that, yeah, they're obligated because that's what they said. Doesn't matter. They didn't have. That's not your problem. You went, changed your whole day. Right? You got all this aggravation now. So fine. I'll work a whole day. Very good. You cannot now say, "Well, we're going to compensate you because we have nothing." Right? You messed up your whole day. You should be compensated more. You should be compensated what they said. But again, they may have a, according to the law, I'm not saying it's necessarily right, they may have a squirm out clause that says that, if we tell someone to come in and now there's nothing for them to do, all right, we'll pay them something. We're not paying them full value. We're not paying them full value. That could be the law in the books. Question is, according to Jewish law, is that the case? right? So, if a person agreed to it, okay, very good. If they didn't agree, said, you owe me a full day. You messed up my whole day now. I canceled this, I canceled, I could have done other things, and now you totally messed me up. You have a claim. I would think you have a claim, right? I have to verify it further, but at first glance, I would say, sure, you got a claim. They said you're going to give you a full day. But again, they may have a squirm out clause saying that, well, what we said didn't really meet the reality. That was true until this other thing happened. That's how they can say it's onus. We would have paid a full day if you worked a full day. You didn't work a full day. They could claim onus, but I don't know if that's a claim or not. I don't know if that's a claim or not. Because you could say it's not my problem. You told me a full day. And the fact that you told me a full day, you messed me up. You messed me up by saying now we don't have anything. Right? So why should I get paid full? It's not my problem. You pay it. It's coming from taxpayers anyway. You pay it. Right? Why should I get half? But they're going to say, we're giving you half because you didn't do anything. And if you didn't do anything, why should we pay full price? Right? So what would the simple answer be? Simple answer would be no. You're 100% liable because you opened your mouth and said, you're going to give me full day. And I just changed my whole day. I don't know if that holds up. I'm not sure that holds up. Right? My gut feeling wants to say it does. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, one more, Rabbi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, that does answer my question. It just in my situation, I don't want to cause a fuss and, they don't want me anymore or something, but I've been at the job for you.
You know what they say, better take half than nothing, right?
Yeah. But sometimes on the job, they'll tell me, okay, you need to write the student a pass to go use a bathroom.
Right.
And I'll say, I don't have any forms for it. And they'll say, okay, we'll just use a sticky note.
Right.
And I don't know if the teacher came out of pocket to buy that sticky note or not. So I feel a little uncomfortable using it. I remember that there's a law where it takes even a clip.
Right. The question is, would the person be stringent on it? I remember I used to work for a title company, American title company here, in Israel, and I would say, I would ask, can I print out something my own personal use? So the answer basically was yes, as long as you're not printing out a book. Right? You want to print out 30 pages? No. You want to print out a couple pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, okay. Right? That they'll allow. That they'll allow. What about let's say you have downtime. You don't have any work, but you could, I don't know, you could be looking up things, perfecting your craft more, this, that, but you're checking your email. Are you allowed to do that on the job? So, if they allow you to do it when you have downtime, good. If not, you got to be doing other things. So that's stealing. Right? In other words, you're not using your time like you should. Right? You have to find out who they belong to. I don't think people are going to be so stringent by one piece of, a sticky note. If you're telling me like, using, I don't know, someone had a wad of paper and you take like a whole bunch of pages and something like that, out of the norm, yeah, that might be a little bit, that might be a little bit much. But at the same time, somebody, I think one sticky note, I don't think someone's going to be so stringent on it. But if somebody is particular about their things, they don't want their things touched, let's say, then that might be an issue. That might be an issue. But on the other hand, a person may say, look, it's a one sticky note. What's the person going to care? But if that, it's like borrowing a book in a certain way. And inside the book, it says, don't use without permission. Do we say a sticky note is the same thing? I don't think so. I don't think someone's going to care. Right? If you let's say someone had a whole, let's say it was the last sticky note. Okay. Then, I might not do it. But if they had a whole stack of sticky notes, you took one, you can tell them afterwards. I don't think it'd be a big deal. But if you took like 20 of them, I think that would be, a big deal. But this question came up a lot about printing things, right? People had all kinds of things they wanted to print. Okay, right? So if you had a page or two, they didn't care. You're going to start printing 20 pages, they're going to care, right? So, on the job, you got to be very careful. Very, very careful. If you're not allowed to check personal email while on the job, only when you're on your break, and you do that, you owe that money back. That's stealing. That's definitely stealing. I guarantee people do it. I guarantee. People are doing things they shouldn't be doing while they're working. That's stealing, right? If you're working for yourself, it's one thing. If you're working for an employer, that's not allowed. That's stealing. Because everybody's not going to care. I've already done all my work. Depends. It depends. I remember working for a title company. If you had free time, you were there to perfect your craft. Get better at what you did. They don't want you, wasting time, right? Because they're paying you. Obviously, they're paying you, right? But if it would be clear, you have downtime. You don't have any work now, right? Can I look at my email? Why not? If they're not stringent on it, they're not going to make you do other things, then fine, right? But if they are, even if you're downtime, you got to sit there like a dolt, and twiddle your thumbs or whatever, or just read a book or whatever. So okay, right? But I guarantee. Not that I've been in the corporate, business world or whatever, but my assumption is that people use some personal time while they work. That'd be my assumption, right? Because they're not working 100% of the time. If you got a lot of busy work and you don't have time, good. But, there's going to be a little bit of downtime. When there's downtime, I guarantee, with all the money I don't have, I guarantee, I use all raised money we don't have, right? I'll guarantee they're wasting time when they could have been doing other things. Everyone's got a smartphone. So what are they doing? They're looking things up. They're doing, they got downtime. So if the employer allows it, very good. If he doesn't allow it, you're in trouble. That's considered stealing. Now, you don't get the death penalty for that per se, right? But that's a problem. Again, a lot of places, I'm sure it's a problem. And that's why probably a lot of places have surveillance of what you're doing, right? They can go in, you got a special email, whatever, they can see what you're doing, right? So it's less of a, I would say it's less of a temptation, because you're in their computer, let's say. So on your phone's a different thing, but, each job's going to have its different thing, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. If you're not allowed to do it, that's stealing. And, doesn't matter what you say. It's what the boss says, right? Whoever's paying you, they have a right, right? They have a right to say what they want. And if you don't do it, you don't uphold it. You're stealing time. You're liable. You're liable for stealing.
And losing it.
Yeah, it's a big temptation. Big temptation. Because everyone's on their phones all the time. So it's a huge temptation. Look at your email, look at this. I see it in other ways. I can't, I can't imagine unless, again, someone is so busy, that they don't do that. I see people when I go up north, going back up north tomorrow, there's inside one of the bus stations, there's a place for all kinds of candies, chips, different things. So a person working there, they got no customers. They're on their phone almost 100% of the time. Now, you think the owner who's paying the bill cares? When customers come, you get off your phone. Okay. Right. But are they supposed to be on the phone when they have dead time? What else are they supposed to do? Walk around, twiddle their thumbs, pick their nose? What are they supposed to do? Right. So they're going to be given leeway, in different ways. I see it by, a store that sells all kinds of, things for cell phones and, different things. So I see a guy there. Nobody's around. He's on his phone. If he's got other things to do, okay, he puts his phone down, whatever. But if he doesn't have customers, doesn't have things to do, that's what he's doing. That's what most people are doing because they're bored. So what do I do? Look at the news for the 10th time. Look at someone sent me an email. Right. So again, if that's written in the contract and that's what you're allowed to do, you have downtime, no customers, you don't have to straighten anything up, so it's okay. If not, you're stealing. And guaranteed this is a problem. Right. Without knowing anything, I'll put my money where it's not worth. Put it in my mouth here. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not a problem that people don't abuse it. I'm sure they do. Right? I'm sure they do. But I'll just take a quick look, go back to work. There are plenty of places they don't have time, so good. I'm talking about where there's a little bit of downtime. If there's a little bit of downtime, can the boss say, I want you to do this, that, and the other thing when there's downtime? Sure. But what if he doesn't say anything? Right? He says you got to be working, and if there's downtime, they can do other things. Right? That wouldn't be a problem. But if it's clear policy, can't do this. Well, downtime, yeah, that would be forbidden. Yeah, any other questions?
Think about it, Ari. Losing
Okay.
So some of that I may do go review later, but thank you so much. I did catch I think most, and it pretty much answers my question. Some just
Okay.
like the Terry will say, we don't have any work for you now, and take a break. But I can think I'll be doing the right thing if free time. I have some free time, but it's not necessarily. I don't know if it's a break. I can be doing like company's
If it's a
email
break,
or
if it's a break, there's nothing to talk about. You can do what you want, right? If it's not a break, let's say it's in between, but you do have some free time. The question is, what are they telling you when you have that free time? Nothing to do. Why can't you look at your email? It shouldn't be a problem, right? But I'm just saying, if they have a set policy, they don't want you to do that only on your free time, then that's stealing. That would be stealing because that's their policy. Tell people they can't go on their smartphone when they have free time. Good luck. What else are they going to do? They're going to go nuts. I was in the States. It's just unbelievable. Here it's just as bad. Everyone is on these phones. They're texting. They're this. They're that. It's all over, and that's what people are talking about. I mean, not everybody, not every second, right? But people are so addicted to their phones. It's hard to imagine, even in a work environment, that they're not looking at their phone when they're doing something. I see it by drivers, for goodness sakes. That's even worse. Sometimes I'll see bus drivers as they're driving along, they'll take a look at their phone. I'm like, no, keep your eye on the road. But they're stopped at a traffic light. Right? They have no, some people have no compulsion to look at their phone or whatever. Okay, stop at a traffic light still. So that would lead me to believe that in other situations, unless it would be absolutely forbidden, that the employer said you can't do it, fine. Otherwise, well, people will do it. If it, and that it won't be an issue if there's not something concrete, right? In other words, if the employer is not concrete, then you have to go according to what people do. So people are allowed to do it; they're allowed to do it. But if you get singled out because of it, yeah, it's a problem, right? So, yeah, it's. I remember because there was a lot of downtime. There was. Sorry, I shouldn't say a lot. There was downtime. And when there's downtime, what did they want? They wanted you to perfect what go through other things that are going to help you perfect your craft. So they didn't want you just wasting time. Why? Because they're paying you. But in other venues, not a big deal. You're selling something, whatever. There's nobody there. You don't have to straighten anything out. Let's say, I don't know, you work in retail, so it's a different issue. People sit in the cash register. No one's, nothing's going on. No one's there. Can't look at your phone. You have nothing else to do. I don't know. I don't know why that would be forbidden unless it's concrete that it says forbidden. Yeah. Any other questions?
um, wasn't found. So someone leaves.
You're coming in choppy.
Okay. Reception. Last night I was, and while I was checking, a bag boy comes in, the lady who was helping me with some merchant bills that was in the cart.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, will you keep it or anything like that? But something lost, like during the property, there's a key on the ground. You pick, because sometimes I've said no. So I don't know what would apply with that.
The question would be, if there's somebody obviously left it there, right? Somebody left the money there or something there, then obviously it belongs to someone else. If it's, the question is where it is. The question is where it is. If it's outside the store, could have come from anywhere, right? If it's inside the store, you have an obligation to return it. So money doesn't really have a sign, right? Money, you know, unless, let's say, person had a certain number of bills put in a certain place in a certain position. That would mean someone left it there to take it back. But someone left it on their cart, you have no idea who it is. I mean, I would say beyond the letter of the law, you know, before you left the store, you know, you take it to someone and say that anyone loses, right? But then anyone could claim it. That's a problem, right? And anyone say, "Oh, I lost the money," right? Any Tom, Dick, and Harry could come in, you know, come and claim it. Do you have to go that far? I don't think you do. Right? I think you can keep it, right? But if it's something that's a sign, you know, that's a different issue. I'm not saying the place is a sign, but it's got a, I don't know, it's got a signature on it, something that it would show it belonged to someone. If it doesn't belong to anyone, you probably keep it. That's what I would say. Any other questions?
That's all for me. So much. I appreciate it.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I'm going to sign out because I got a class shortly. Anyone has any questions, feel free. Shoot me an email. Otherwise, see everybody next week. Wish everyone a good middle of the day or almost end of the day for me. And everyone have a great rest of the week.